Greetings, welcome to the latest of my deep dive videos. Today I'm going to explore the two eclipses of September 2025. Polar opposites. The first is in the sign of Pisces, very much the last zodiac sign, the sign of culmination. It's quite dreamy potentially, but of course its traditional ruler is Jupiter, and that's very much about heightening our spiritual understanding. But we also have a solar eclipse, the only solar eclipse of this series between the signs of Pisces and Virgo, which occurs on the 21st. And it's an extremely challenging one because it's in a crunching opposition with Saturn and Neptune. So eclipses provide a backdrop energy for 6 months, but they're predicated on the position of the nodal axis. So the nodes next year are going to switch into the sign of Aquarius. So guess what? We have an Aquarius solar eclipse on the 17th of February. So after the solar eclipse, which occurs on the 21st of September, the next one will be in a new series. But we do have one final eclipse in the Pisces Virgo axis series, and that's on the 14th of February, and it is going to be in Virgo, and it is going to be influenced dramatically by Saturn. So if we go back to the 18th of September last year, when this journey began, and we had the lunar eclipse in the sign of Pisces, that was very close to the shimmering energies of Neptune. So Neptune can be, in terms of its best manifestation, particularly through Pisces, very much about healing, sacrifice, can be to do with the arts, our imagination, escapism. Of course, it has its lower vibrational energy as well, can be deceptive, confusing, draining, eroding. But Saturn, of course, has been in the sign of Pisces, and it is going to return to Pisces on the 1st of September 2025. And Saturn doesn't like being in Pisces because Saturn likes boundaries, and the sign of Pisces is limitless, partly to do with that Neptunian energy, but also partly to do with the expansive energy of Jupiter. Now Saturn therefore feels somewhat compromised in the sign of Pisces. So these two eclipses that are going to occur this September, although the lunar eclipse has the blessings of Jupiter, ironically, forging a terrific angle to the position of the eclipse, which happens to be in a conjunction with the North Node, and a sextile to the Sun, so that's providing some levitation. But that solar eclipse on the 21st, as I mentioned, is opposite directly with Saturn and indirectly, so a disassociate opposition with Neptune, the ruler of the sign of Pisces, just in that early degree of Aries. So we need to think about big pictures. I feel that what happens a lot, particularly on YouTube, if I could be really honest, is people will put a title on a video which adds a sense of drama, and we can focus on the individual energies of eclipses because obviously they are known to have a fated impact, and certainly in ancient times their relevance was hugely influential. And I think we've also seen, because obviously we don't always experience eclipses exactly where we live, but we can read about them or watch them even live these days, but eclipses in some ways do have an impact on us all collectively. And I think a lot of astrologers, serious astrologers who I'd really agree with, would say that the eclipse line is where the impact can be felt most keenly. Now, I can't do that in a collective video like this. I can only give you that big picture of how it will pan out for all of us. So let's just boil this down simply. Pisces can be about healing. It can be about spirituality. It can be about sacrifice. It can be about compassion. It can be about all the best of person-kind. But it also can be where we're getting the outcome of our attitudes. With Saturn, which goes through a 29.5-year cycle, is in the last zodiac sign from the 1st of September through to the 14th of February next year. So we're getting the consequences, the outcome of Saturn's influence as it went through the entire zodiacal cycle, and it's going to be reflected outwards by the power of these eclipses. So if we're thinking about a fancy headline on a video, or being a bit scary, or being overly optimistic, I feel that what we really need to do is drill down into the details, understand what the event charts tell us. We can talk to the cows come home about the general themes of eclipses, but we have to think about the axis, this one between Pisces and Virgo. We have to know that the nodes are involved in the mix. We have to know that there's a succession that's going to take place. So next 17th of February, it moves into the sign of Aquarius. That's really, really important. But also we need to look at the exact moment that these eclipses occur, because that tells us what houses. So we have the zodiacal sign, so we get some themes from that, but the houses give us a much clearer clarification of how that will be manifested outwards. And that's what I'm going to share with you. And then I'm going to go through each of the 12 zodiac signs from Aries through to Pisces to give you a flavour of not what you can expect this month, but for the next 6 months, because that's proper astrology. I'm astrologer Patrick Arundell. If you're new to my channel, thank you so much for joining us. We're very much a family. People have been chatting away together on YouTube for many, many years, and that's the great thing about my channel. So if you've got any thoughts, please do share them. If you are someone who's visiting this channel and you're not yet a subscriber, please help the channel to continue to thrive. And also please like as well as comment, but if you could just click or tap that bell notification symbol, that makes a huge difference. We know that YouTube doesn't always alert us when even the people we're subscribed to share stuff, but that would just be very helpful. Also, I want to say, if you'd like to download my Eclipse specials, this is a workbook which will help you to negotiate these next 6 months, and it's also going to give you a little bit of the mythology around these events, not least that the solar eclipse of the 21st is actually a black moon, the second black moon in succession. What does that mean? I'll share with you that in that download too. So it's totally free. You can download underneath this video a lot more written information about how to navigate this next 6 month period to the best of your ability. Now, just finally, if you'd like to work with me one-to-one, please check out my testimonials below. I'm always incredibly humbled about what people say about working with me. Also, if you would care to visit my new website at patrickarundell.com, we're making improvements all the time. You can enjoy your daily, weekly, monthly and yearly general love and Vedic forecast. You can also enjoy my 3-card tarot. I really think it's absolutely stunning. Just keep refreshing the page as you ask your question and then press for the outcome, and you'll get some really insightful insights. And then also you can sign up for your free daily horoscope to be fired to your device each morning. How good is that? And that helps you just to wake up, it's there, and you know what's in store. And it's not just about your zodiac sign. I also provide an overview for that day that we can all collectively relate to. So I'm going to share with you first of all on the screen the event chart for the lunar eclipse of the 7th of September. First up is the solar illustration. The reason I do this is the zodiac is a wheel, isn't it? And it's a journey, the journey of the animals, zodiac, so the procession of the animals. And it starts with the ram. So that begins each year. The new year is with the vernal equinox and 0 degrees Aries. So what the solar illustration helps us to do is all just relate to this in a very quick way. So you can see the sun is in Virgo, quite understandably, but in the 6th house. Now, in Sirius astrology signs, Virgo has a flavour of the 6th house, but it's not exactly the same, but certainly a flavour. On the other side of the heavens we have the moon, and there's that nodal position, the point of destiny, in the 12th. So what we can get with moon and node in the 12th house is things that have been hidden can come into the open. But it's also telling us, particularly around trying to take care of our welfare, that if we're too focused on the practical side of things, but we're not looking after how we feel, that could create something that's out of alignment. So we're really being asked to be open-minded. And the great news is Jupiter. So you can see Jupiter exalted in Cancer is linking beautifully with the North Node in the sign of Pisces, but also with the moon there. And of course the moon rules Cancer, so we've got some mutual receptivity. And intriguingly, we've also got Mercury in the sign of Virgo, which rules that sign, one of the two signs it rules. So some interesting stuff going on. But what I really want to draw your attention to is 12th, 6th house energy, particularly in terms of our professional and work situation. We may discover over the next 6 months who's for us, but who's not for us, but they may not tell us themselves. It may be that things are going to be a bit shady. There could be some backbiting and politics. So just in the bigger sense of things, we need to make sure that we do the things we're tasked to do, Virgo, in a very precise, accurate and methodical way. So we need to be meticulous. So that's what Virgo's telling us. But the moon and the node are telling us also that to tune into our collective experience through our life, because the 12th sign is very much about that accumulative experience. So we need to be guided by our instincts. So that's an illustration just in a very basic way. But Jupiter is saying, I feel, that it's very important to have faith in what joins us together, if you like, humanity, because there are lots of good things out there about people. People do lots of thoughtful, kind gestures, can be very caring in what at times can be a very hostile world, not least because of the rate of change that things are going at. So if we do feel a bit out of sorts, we don't feel that our physical and emotional health is particularly well balanced, there could be someone close to us, someone very caring, maybe a family member, maybe someone in our extended group, maybe just a very kind person who can actually provide a lot of knowledge and insights to guide the situation. Let's just have a look at the natal event chart. Now, I base it on Greenwich, but not because I live in the UK. If I lived in America, I'd still base it on Greenwich because of the prime meridian. I also base it on universal time, not British time. So this is intriguing. You can see the sun, along with the ruler of Mercury, is in house 7. House 7 is where we connect to people, but it's also where we have to set our boundaries. And you can see the moon and the node are in the first house, which is very much about our identity. But Jupiter's actually very playful in the 5th house, encouraging us that to deal with this eclipse, this first lunar eclipse, which could be very emotional, very highly charged, we must have confidence in our ability to use our flair, our artistry, to deal with some of the stresses and strains that could come up. But essentially over the next 6 months, this lunar eclipse is saying our relationships are going to be important, but we mustn't sacrifice our identity in being too much people pleasers. The energy of Pisces can be so sacrificing, it also can end up feeling invisible. So I feel that what the event chart natal is saying, make sure we have firm boundaries. And ironically, Mars, which of course can be feisty, is in the 7th house in Libra. It may be in its detriment, but it's a great place to have Mars if we just occasionally want to say no. But whatever stresses and strains life throws at us from an emotional viewpoint, we do need to make sure that we're functioning in a more practical way. But even if we're doing that, doing the hoovering, tidying up, attending to our work, we're finding ways at some level to make it enjoyable and engaging. So Jupiter's saying to us, let's try and be as positive and stay upbeat as we can with what we're dealing with. So I've mentioned to you how each eclipse series is intrinsically linked to the nodes. The North Node, the point of destiny, very much about our potential and where our direction of travel lies in a very positive way. The South Node can be where we have a kind of more attached attitude. It may be the things that we're fearful of letting go of, being too much of a people pleaser, being more fearful to express our individuality, being someone who may be disinclined to take risks. That's the South Node. That holds us back. And of course, on this particular eclipse series, the South Node is in the sign of Virgo, which suggests if we're too much invested in perfectionism or trying to get everything just so, we never take that step forwards. And Pisces energy is about flair, it's passion, but it's also about spiritual belief. But in each person's natal chart, that's the key. Where are those nodes? The North Node, that potential, the South Node, not just by sign, but also by house, and incredibly important, whether they're interacting with other planets in a key way. For example, a T-square with Saturn or Pluto, or are they in a delightful trine with the Sun? So the position of those nodes in our own nativity is critical. But there is another form of astrology, and it's called Draconic Astrology, where we take the North Node back to 0 degrees Aries. For anyone whose North Node is pretty close to 0 degrees Aries, it won't change their chart very much. But for many of us it does, because obviously the nodes will be around 0 degrees Aries only once every 18.5 years, and also that absolute degree around 0 degrees, not for very long, because the reversal of the nodes is pretty swift. So if you'd like to understand more about Draconic Astrology, the dragon's head, the dragon's tail, it gives you enormous insights that goes beyond your tropical natal chart. So the Draconic chart is more like a soul energy. It could be said to be very karmic. So what we bring into the world, but what we can achieve in this world. Now, Draconic charts can be very different from natal charts. So, for example, Madonna is a Leo natal chart, but she's a Draconic Aquarius person. And that is the fascinating part of Draconic. It gives us a code that we're not expecting. Now, you can order your personal, totally unique Draconic natal chart, but also forecast for year 2026 and get the rest of this year 3 by seeing the link beneath this video, but also get 30% off. Now I'm sharing with you next the solar eclipse of the 21st of September. As I mentioned, the only solar eclipse of this particular series between the axis of Pisces and Virgo. And intriguingly, it is a black moon. It's a black moon because it's the second technical new moon within the season of Virgo this year. The previous new moon, which occurred just as the sun had arrived into the sign of Virgo across the 22nd and 23rd of August, that started the process. So that was a black moon, but in a different way of thinking about it, because that was the third new moon of a series of 4 in the season. But this is a black moon for a different reason. It's more of an astrological black moon, the second new moon in the season of Virgo. And it's a solar eclipse which occurs very, very late. Now again, the solar illustration shows the position of the sun and also of the moon, not quite together because of the very slight difference between the new moon and the solar eclipse, but in house 6 in Virgo. But the real cruncher is the position of Saturn. And as I mentioned earlier, when we had that lunar eclipse in Virgo of the 14th of March, that also had Saturn right in an opposition. So Saturn is the greater malefic. And if we think that Pisces is about where we should be, showing perhaps an understanding of those who are less fortunate, making sure that we don't get too caught only in the material or practical world, Saturn's been challenging that in a way. But remember, the big picture is that Saturn's coming to the end of an entire cycle that's taken 29.5 years, which will complete on the 14th of February when it switches back into Aries. So that particular solar eclipse has challenges written all over it, because it's not just Saturn, which can be limiting, cold, mean, distancing, restrictive, critical. It can make us doubt ourselves. It can lower our spirits. But it's also in the conjunction with Neptune still, but Neptune is very close to the exact opposition with the Sun and the Moon. It's just known as disassociate because it's not going across the same axis. It's still in the fire sign of Aries, just, even though it's in retrograde. So if we think about the upside of Virgo, it's very much about physical energy. It's about being virtuous. It's about refinement. So it can be looking at what we eat, drink, and also the exercise and rest we get. And I feel we really need to take it seriously from this solar eclipse, because I feel the back end of this year and into the early part of next year, until we get that solar eclipse in Aquarius on the 17th of February, is going to be one of the most challenging periods we've experienced for a very long time. The world is such a complex place. Obviously you've got power, but you've also got power of technology, and technology has the power to disempower personkind. Let's be really honest about it. The sign of Virgo is about work. It's about the 10th house is where we connect to the wider world, and it can be where we have positions of responsibility. So it can be about the actual role that we have and how the public perceives us. But the 6th house is the processes, the things that we have to do, the obligations we have. So obligations to other people can, I feel, be really quite challenging over this period. And if we feel really hedged in by the demands of other people, that adds an extra layer of complexity to the situation. There is a little bit of levitation that comes from Mars being in a semi-sextile to the Sun and the Moon, but of course that means it's in a quincunx to Saturn and Neptune. So what I would say about that, Mars is coming to the end of its journey in Libra. It's going to go home to Scorpio, but you can see that Mars may take a little bit of the pressure off us in some ways, but in other ways it's not really the solution. So I feel the best way to deal with this solar eclipse is be very conscious in terms of the overall perspective of what we're giving and getting. It's important that we're integrated about our emotional, spiritual, psychological well-being, but also the practical side of life. If we try to be perfectionists on one hand, or the Virgo energy, but ignore the more feeling side of things, that won't help. So we need to find a balance, and that balance is going to be somewhat elusive. Let's look at it from a natal perspective. A really interesting thing in terms of the solar eclipse is that Sun and the Moon are actually in the 6th house. So we get that echo, and you can see that Saturn and the position of Neptune are in the 12th house. So once more that flags up the importance of staying in touch with the big picture. And one of the downsides of Virgo energy, it can be microscopically focused on details, but finds it very difficult to widen the lens. So we can get so caught up in the processes, or maybe even a little bit obsessed, that we don't just think, what is the meaning of all of this? So essentially, particularly with the amount of chemicals that seem to be in our bodies these days, but also in the food chain, in all the products we consume. We also know about the amount of plastics that are in the oceans, the amount of pollution that's in the water, whether it's rivers, lakes, or the sea, whether it is to do with what type of energy sources we could use. Now, you may think that I would be very, very much to do with new sources of energy. I'm actually very pragmatic. I have a diesel car because where we live is very hilly and you need the grunt, but also we hardly use it. So if I spent a lot of money on an electric car that ultimately would have to have its engine or its battery disposed of, that actually would be not so good for the environment of having an old runabout, which is far from posh, but it tends to start on a cold day and we don't drive it very much at all, so we don't really burn that much diesel, and it's very efficient because it's a very well established engine. It's a Volkswagen. So there is always a bigger picture, but there are things that we are particularly careful of, you know, in terms of trying to get local, trying to get stuff that won't have chemicals on it, washing stuff where we can, using filtration if you can afford it in any way you can. These are really important virtues. And if we can be very conscious that chemicals are not just in food, they are in clothes. So if you have a shirt that doesn't need ironing, there's something added to that. If you're using a pan that never burns, that can have a chemical added to it. So the more aware that we are of all of this, the more we're protecting our physical well-being. But also we have to be conscious that Saturn is teaching us all, because it is about consequences and outcomes. It is the teacher, but it's also the planet of time. It's showing us at the end of this big cycle just what we've been doing for the last 29 and a half years. So if it's not in balance, if it's not as well positioned as it could be, Saturn is going to let us know before he returns into the sign of Aries on the 14th of February, before going into that very special conjunction with Neptune that was just elusive this year in terms of the exact degree. So it's big picture time, this stuff, and with Virgo that can be something we can forget about. Now you might want to ask, who are the zodiac signs that are going to be affected most by these events? Well, I think it's a fair question in terms of the degrees, because on the lunar eclipse it's at 15/22, so I guess anyone with 13 to 17, particularly of the mutable signs, so that would be Gemini, that would be Virgo, Sagittarius, and obviously Pisces. And then in terms of the event chart for the solar eclipse, it's pretty well on the anaretic degree. Think about that, the fate of that, incredible. And so anyone who is late mutable or early cardinal, so we're talking about the mutables again, just to remind you, is Gemini, Virgo, Sagittarius and Pisces, but also the early cardinals is Aries, Cancer, Libra and Capricorn. So anyone who's 28 degrees of the mutables through to the end, and the first couple of degrees of the cardinals can feel that solar eclipse very keenly. But of course it depends on your natal chart. Your natal chart will have the distribution of players around it that goes beyond your ascendant, that goes beyond your sun, that goes beyond your moon. There is somewhat of an obsession with the big three. The key, you know, is looking at the total map in an integrated way. And that's where, working with me directly, very often I work with people who are astrologers, believe it or not. And so they will know more than me in some ways, because people have a particular interest in perhaps asteroids or so forth and so on. I'm almost like the general practitioner doctor, giving an oversight of the situation. But it is interesting how by looking at things afresh, we can find the bones of what will influence the situation the most. So the intriguing thing about the solar eclipse in terms of the natal chart based on Greenwich, the prime meridian and universal, is that Pluto, the planet of transformation, is the most dominant planet because it's right at the top of the map. So that's something that we need to be very, very mindful of. Just looking there, it's also in a quincunx with Venus, just early in the sign of Virgo. So that's another juxtaposition we need to be mindful of, because of course Venus is supporting the energy of where the solar eclipse occurs. So just to summarize, I think many of us need to have a degree of structure in our lives, because even if we're pretty laid back like Elisa and I are, we still get some satisfaction if we put the hoover around, tidy up, change the bed in. It makes you feel good. You create a different energy in your space, mopping the floor and so forth and so on. Now, some people are so into that kind of stuff, the first thing they do when they get in from work is get the bleach out and wash the kitchen floor. And that's what I mean about the polarities, where the Pisces energy, where we might be sort of doing a bit of tidying up, but we probably will be talking about how the day feels, what's going on in the world, how we feel with that, what our dreams are about, very Piscean. So we're getting a bit of a balance. That's not to say that we couldn't be more methodical, because we most certainly could. But you get my drift. Now, somebody else would think, oh, I don't want to talk about dreams, I want to get tidied up, because that's what they're attached to, and that's what gives them a sense of comfort. And I think we all know that the sign of Pisces at its lower vibration can be a bit to do with addiction, and Virgo at its lower vibration can be about a desire for perfection, which is totally unachievable. So if we spend our whole lives trying to get perfect jobs, perfect partners, perfect this, perfect that, you certainly won't get perfect if you follow the football team that I follow. So we have to be aware that life is such an imperfect process. So if we can just let our emotions breathe into the practicality of Virgo through these two eclipses over the next 6 months, we're going to survive them all the better. Please stay with me as I go through each of the zodiac signs from Aries through to Pisces. Please do subscribe to the channel, make some comments, and please check out patrickarundell.com, because your support is absolutely vital to us. So Aries, your eclipse survival guide for the next 6 months sees us needing to be mindful of your ruler Mars. And Mars, as the solar eclipse occurs, is on the anaretic degree. So whatever happens with the lunar eclipse earlier in the month, I think by the time that the solar eclipse occurs, I think you're going to be feeling much feistier if things are a little bit out of kilter. But why should you feel feistier? Well, one of the things may be because Saturn on the 1st of September inverses back into your 12th solar house. So whether you're relating to this in terms of your ascendant, whole sign, or in terms of your sun, I think it's just likely to be the case that right through to the middle of February next year, it's going to feel like you're clearing up loose ends. If you're older, you could go back to 29.5 years ago and think what this 5 months period represented for you then. You may be quite intrigued at some of the things that happened at that time. It gives you a little bit of an insight of what you could expect, but not a perfect one, because obviously you're different, the world's different, and the astrology will be different. It's just Saturn's going through the same phase. And it's also pushing you, if you're someone who's rather swashbuckling in terms of being an Aries, you like to be on the front foot, taking on challenges, you like to be very dynamic, which is absolutely fantastic. It's just pushing you in a way, Saturn, to just be mindful of the potential liabilities or the potential downside of situations. So, if we go into something in haste, we may repent at leisure. So Saturn is asking you to just keep one foot in being a little bit more grounded, even though it is watery. You can have a watery grounded bank by the side of the river, but seriously, just keep a little bit mindful of the big picture of how things feel emotionally, spiritually, psychologically around whatever it is that's exciting you, whether it's someone you encounter in September or beyond that really captures your imagination romantically, whether it is to do with your work, whether it is to do with getting other people to do more around the domestic chores. Just stay in touch with how you feel, but that doesn't mean to say that you shouldn't be connecting to people in a very vibrant way. And that's where Mars can be such an asset to you, because I think Pisces energy, which of course is reflected by the lunar eclipse can be very, very giving, but we can give too much, and we can definitely give to the wrong people. So it's all about making sure we get the balance of being a decent emotional human being with a decent practical human being, and that's really the thing for you. So if you are encountering any opportunities or challenges, Mars can help you to connect to others in a passionate and, I think, a needed assertive way. Why not be assertive? But you do need to be aware of the details, the Virgo. You need to be aware of what's not immediately obvious. So that's the hidden shadow side, Pisces energy, but also aware of your own shadow side as you go through this next 6 months. But I think essentially, if you get an opportunity to be a little bit more virtuous, pardon me, a little bit more virtuous about how you look after yourself, the amount of rest you get, are you letting healing into your life? Are you pushing yourself too hard? Are you trying to be too dedicated with your work? It's all about balance. That's what this eclipse is about, but it is balancing what we can't see with getting caught up in what is immediately needed, but in actual fact it's about you deciding what your boundaries will be. It's the secret of navigating this next 6 months. So for you, Taurus, the next 6 months, particularly with the lunar eclipse, has a gorgeous opportunity. It occurs, of course, in Pisces, which for you is very friendly, but you also have Jupiter, the planet of exuberance, optimism. It's the greater benefit, forging a wonderful link to the position of the moon, but also the North Node. So it's possible with Jupiter for you in house 3 that you're going to be having some intriguing conversations over this next 6 months, which could give you a lot of insight or connection to some very exciting new people. Now, the solar eclipses are usually very much about setting our intentions, pushing forwards in a bright, sparkling way to something that we're wanting to attain. The solar eclipse for you is pushing you to be very self-expressive. But the intriguing thing is, Neptune is just still in your 12th house. Saturn's only just shifted off that point at the 1st of September back into 11. So it's possible that how you view yourself, your inner view or inner workings, your relationship with your deepest emotions, are going to be very important in terms of demonstrating your talents over this next half year, because it's possible that you may encounter people who have different values to you or who are not quite as on side as you would like. So you can see there's quite a contrast between the two eclipses. The lunar eclipse on the whole for a lunar eclipse is very positive. The solar eclipse can be very challenging because whatever you're wanting to achieve in terms of your longer term future, that's where Saturn's really applying its muscle. And I think it is the case that, you know, resistance could be in the works until you get round to that Aquarius solar eclipse on the 17th of February next year, which really will help you when it comes to career, property, goal setting. So just be aware that there could be some initial very encouraging interactions in the early part of this month, but I feel later in September and through the last half of the year, some of your big hopes may not evolve quite as quickly as you would like, and there could be certain individuals who are a little bit jealous or envious of what your talents are or what you're trying to manifest, and there could be some cooling of some old relationships or associations, and some of those could actually be somewhat surprising. Gemini, you have a reputation for using your quick wits, ability to pivot and deal with situations very rapidly in order to manage your life. But that does come from the rulership of your ruler Mercury, and also because your sign is an air sign. What you're going to have to grapple with in September and through the next 6 months is a much more psychological dimension coming from Pisces, but that's very much to do with your connection to the world. And ironically, the energy in Virgo very much about how things feel, your everyday world, your emotional base, any connections to your family. So I feel there's going to be a bit of a seesaw between work, your obligations, responsibilities and goals, but also how you're managing all that, how at ease you feel and how at peace you feel. Are you getting the time to reflect and rest at the heart of your world? So some Gemini people, for example, I sense could be thinking about property issues through these two eclipses, not just in September. It could go through right to the end of the year and into early 26. And for some it may be, should I make the decision to work from home or modify my home in some ways to allow that connection to the world to work more easily in the comfort of my everyday surroundings. For others there may be challenges around if you have got older parents or older relatives that need your support, or you are finding that you've got youngsters who are wanting to go out into the world and take on their first challenge, they may need some support as well. But as this process begins, Mars, the planet which can be very much to do with being swashbuckling and self-assured, is actually in a very playful, upbeat part of your chart. And that, in a way, can be such an asset, because if you do experience some stresses and strains, then that can give you a little bit more stamina to deal with them. But let's rewind to that 7th of September, because one of the things you can gain from that early lunar eclipse, some good fortune could come to you, and that good fortune could be financial. It may be in the guise of someone very close to you being very generous. It may be, if you've got your own business, you'll be able to work things around to perhaps give yourself a little bit more of a dividend in some ways. But because Jupiter is linking so perfectly with the position of the moon and the node, if you're heading in the right direction in your career and it feels balanced with your emotional world, there's a great chance that some kind of uplift around your income could occur through to the early part of 26. Now the solar eclipse, usually a great opportunity to launch things, set our intentions, be very mindful of what we can individually steer, so we can be a bit more on the tiller of our lives, is in the 4th house. Now the 4th house is that more feeling dimension, but it's in a crunching opposition with Saturn. If there are any politics in your family, or there are some challenges around where you live, or your work is really having an impact on how you feel and the comfort or time you have to rest, it's going to show up in a very strong way over this next 6 months. So I think for most Geminis it is going to be important to try to be aware of the energy of Mars, because Mars is saying that at times in your 5th house it would be good for you to have some diversions, because whatever life throws at us, sometimes it's good to go for a walk, watch a film, read a book, meet up with some friends who maybe can help to move the moment. But I think that this, for you who's an air sign, is not a period that you're going to be able to just steer with your quick wits. I think you need to be aware of the emotional dimension of life, be open to it, but also conscious that there may be some demands in terms of the outer world as well over this next half year. So Cancer, with your rulership of the moon, you feel lunar energy very acutely. And because Jupiter, the planet which traditionally rules the sign of Pisces, is in your sign, I feel that gives you an opportunity with the lunar eclipse of the 7th of September, particularly because that's so close to the North Node. So the North Node is urging you to think about your philosophies, urging you to think about your higher values. It may be about where you want to be free. It may also be about travel or higher education. And because the node's in the mix and there's the mutual receptivity with the ruler of Pisces, Jupiter in your sign, exalted, I feel you should have confidence in trusting your instincts, because perhaps when you don't trust your instincts is when you can get overwhelmed. It doesn't feel so right because you're not quite so sure, because maybe you're trying to be more logical. But there's the rub, because the solar eclipse occurs in house 3, very much to do with how we think, how we communicate, particularly these days in a very quick, fast way through digital media. And on the other side of the heavens, we have the grisly energies of Saturn. And it's possible over this next 6 months, the combination of these two energies, that however much your hope, your inspiration and your soul energies inform your desires with the lunar eclipse, the harsh reality of Saturn could moderate some of those hopes with what happens with the solar eclipse. So if you are involved in a career or an interface with the world that requires traveling or writing or publishing or the media, it could be a bit heavy going because of the demands of Saturn. And Saturn, just to reiterate, is coming to the end of a big journey which began around about 28 and a half years ago, 28 and 3/4. So when it pitches up back into Aries on the 14th of February, that's the end point of a big cycle of time, 29 and a half years. Depends how old you are. If you're younger, think back to say 7 years ago, 14 years ago, 21 years ago. You'll usually get some idea of how Saturn impacts through 7-year cycles. But if you are someone who's a little bit more established on planet Earth, you can think back more into the past and perhaps compare what was happening 29 and a half years ago. But of course, this particular eclipse series will be totally unique. And I just feel that if you're someone who works in an environment where perhaps it's not really your thing, maybe people don't share your credo, maybe you're being pushed to conform with a particular way of being that isn't how you really want to think or be, you could reach a crunch point over this next 6 months. If you are considering a new mode of transport, I wouldn't rush into the arrangement, because Saturn being in the mix, especially around a contract, means that there could be some hidden issues with that that might not be immediately obvious. So whatever you're thinking about, whatever you're talking about, as ever, your emotions can guide you. They can guide you very well on the lunar eclipse, but just also be aware that Mars is in the 4th house of your chart as this process begins, and Mars can be quite bumpy in the 4th house, a bit up and down, so you may find that your emotions are very closely linked to the conversations and connections that you're having with other people. So Leo, for you, September's eclipses, I think, can throw some light on some areas of your life that may be living a little bit in the shade. And perhaps some of that is to do with where you're most closely connected or invested in other people. We can think about the 2nd house where the Sun in Virgo is, and the 8th house where the lunar eclipse is, along with the node, as purely financial instruments. And it's true, they can be about those things. 2nd house, everyday finance, the budget, the cost of living. The 8th house, the impact of that on our long-term planning, things like pensions, investments, savings, property matters. But the 8th house can also be what we share. So it may be where we can benefit from a partner's generosity or not. But that particular lunar eclipse is blessed by the enlightenment of Jupiter tucked away in your 12th house. Something to do with your past or listening to your spiritual guides will help you around any decisions you need to make. And also the 2nd 8th house axis that's impacted could see you thinking about what you're attached to. The interesting thing about the Sun in the sign of Virgo is that yes, it can help us to micromanage our resources, but also it could throw up a situation where the temptation could be to pinch a penny but lose a pound. So in other words, not see the big picture. And what the node is saying in the 8th house is, or the question it's asking you, what is your future direction and where are you being guided? Where do you feel naturally you're being pulled towards? It is also known as the point of destiny. So something good could be in the works where you're very integrated around that everyday part of your life with someone or a situation which feels respect for what you do. So if that's well balanced, I think Jupiter can help you to celebrate it. But if, as the month goes on, you do want to change your approach to finances, and you do need to rely upon other people, so that could be like a bank, it could be a business advisor, maybe it's a contract you've got if you work for yourself, the fact that the steely, cool gaze of Saturn is peering across the heavens back to the combination of the sun and the moon in the solar eclipse means that a crunch point could be reached over the next 6 months if you are finding it hard to work closely with someone, if there is a difficulty getting them understanding what you invest in terms of energy, time, passion, love, intimacy, and that's really what you're looking for. You're looking for more validation that the effort you're putting in actually feeds back to your sense of identity, because the second house is very much about our values. So you want to feel respected. That's a very Leonian characteristic, but particularly around effort, money, and, to put it bluntly, sex. So if you're in a relationship where it feels that when someone wants to gain something, so it's rather transactional, the charm gets turned on, that could leave you a little bit cold over the next 6 months. You're wanting to feel truly validated, truly appreciated for how much you put in, but also you want to see your finances in trim as well. So everything that you're working towards needs to work along those lines. And don't give away your energy to the people who don't really respect you, don't really appreciate you, perhaps utilising certain exchanges for their own personal use, not because they want to give something back. So there has to be a mutuality between the give and take, and it can be around very, very close, passionate, intimate relationships. It could be around business. It could be around just you getting in trim the ins and outs of your financial situation, especially if you do like to splash out on a bit of luxury here and there, which we all need to do and like to do, but perhaps a time to be very, very astute around your resources. So Virgo, it goes without saying, because you're the host of the solar eclipse, this is super important for you, particularly if you are someone with degrees between about 13 and 17 on the lunar eclipse, but also towards the end of the sign of Virgo on the solar eclipse, because that's just on the anaretic degree. Why is it such a symbolically important time? Well, it's actually because the South Node is in your sign, and I don't feel this will get much coverage. The South Node is where we're more habitually attached. So that could be some of the patterns that do make you feel comfortable, particularly in terms of your individual approach, whereas the position of the North Node on the lunar eclipse is encouraging you to engage with other people, not be so caught up just in what you need for yourself, to think about collaborations, so get the balance of the give and get really perfectly aligned. Now Jupiter, the planet of hope, optimism and good fortune, forges a really helpful link to that lunar eclipse. So the people that you do collaborate well with, and it could be friends, I think they could show up very strongly over the next half year. But the solar eclipse, often a time to really show thrust, give ourselves a glamorous makeover. It's a kind of repeat of the new moon you had across the 22nd and 23rd of August. Obviously a black moon like this one, but this time you've got the conditioning energies of Saturn in an opposition. And if we go right back to the beginning of this journey, Neptune was conjunct the position of the moon with the lunar eclipse of last September. Then we had the lunar eclipse of Virgo of March, where Saturn was very, very much to the fore, and we're getting a repetition with Saturn now back in the sign of Pisces. So if there is a relationship where someone is not prepared to enter into the give and take and is really being very unyielding, that could be a real problem. And you know, particularly if it's around money, because Mars, the planet of passion, is in your sector of everyday finances for the whole of the month. Now, it is the case that the planet of money, Venus, just has crept into Virgo on the second event. But you also have Mercury, your ruler, on the lunar eclipse. So I feel the next 6 months, in a way, could throw up a situation that has sustained itself for you for a very long time. And part of the need for an openness may be that Uranus, right at the top of your chart, is suggesting that something that you have felt quite an attachment to, a life choice, a job, a particular routine, that may be challenged by Uranus, but also by Pluto, because Pluto's in your 6th house. And all of those influences feeding into this suggest that this is not the time to be too rigid. Now, I know you're a mutable sign, but I feel, in a way, if we think about the other mutable players, Sagittarius, very much a lover of travel and freedom, Pisces, very floaty, and Gemini, very changeable. So you're probably the most stable of all the mutable signs. But that stability could mean that you don't want to let go of something, an approach, a connection. If it served you well, that's fine. But if you're really encountering some very strong resistance, whether it's a difficult boss, a partner that you're really finding it much more challenging to coalesce with, that is going to come up from the solar eclipse over the next 6 months and into the start of next year. So essentially, this eclipse series is asking you to celebrate your individuality, but understand that Virgo energy can be about being very precise, and you can have a little bit of a tendency to correct people if they don't quite comply to your view of situations, and that could be where you get some pushback. But I think most of this really is about your way of being can be a lot to do with providing services to others. What the solar eclipse is asking you to do is get in touch with what would really help you to express your individual talent. And don't just stay rigid with what you know because it feels comfortable, because if you do, something may come up that challenges that anyway. So Libra, your 6 months eclipse forecast is intriguing because the lunar eclipse sees your ruler Venus in the glamorous, dramatic Leo, but in a quincunx with the position of the lunar eclipse on the 7th. Now, it is true that Jupiter, which of course is the greater benefit, Venus the lesser, actually forges a very positive link to that lunar eclipse. But that's essentially a part of your chart which has a kind of Virgo feel. So it is about work, can be about routines and responsibilities, and Saturn's back in there from the 1st of September, reminding you right through to the middle of February next year that if there are loose ends from its journey through the previous 2 years to the 25th of May that you've yet to completely clear up, this may be the time you need to do so. Now, initially, the lunar eclipse, despite the fact that Venus for you is very playful, tells you a story. It's playful, social, just at the time when the moon and the node want you to be responsible and the sun is very sensitive. However, the solar eclipse is much, much more challenging, to be honest. It's right on the last degree of the sign of Virgo. It's in a direct clash with Saturn, but also with Neptune. So, with this being the only solar eclipse of the entire Virgo Pisces cycle, this is a big event, and it's suggesting that therefore the energies of the 12th solar house, which is represented for you by Virgo, could tease some stuff into the open that maybe can be a little bit uncomfortable, especially with Saturn in opposition. Saturn in the 6th house can have an impact on our physical energy, our stamina. If we're doing tasks that are somewhat routine, dull, repetitive, our desire to do something more creative and fun can become much stronger. It's also important to just be mindful of your physical well-being. If there are any routine checks that you need to get done, blood pressure, repeats on whatever's, maybe even if you have animals, if you're a big animal lover, just to let you know that the sixth house can be about them, and Saturn of course can create limitation. But if there's something that's weighing you down psychologically, it could have an impact physically, and if there's something physically that's not quite right, that could make you feel very world weary in terms of your psychological health. So that's quite a lot to deal with over these next 6 months. It's just intriguing that Mars is in your sign for the whole of the journey. And it's broadly in a sextile with the aforementioned Venus when we start the eclipses on the 7th. So what I would say to you is Mars can give you, despite the fact it's technically detrimented in Libra, can give you just a bit more robustness to deal with some of the stresses and strains that life just seems to be about. But I would be conscious that something that's been important to you, that you felt very passionate about, the outcome might not be quite as you hope. There could be that there's some machinations going on behind the scenes, especially around work, and if you're hoping to get an exact outcome, it may require resilience and patience, and you just need to be very conscious of the politics. So sometimes in life, the things that hit us the most are the things we're not expecting. So be very watchful and make sure that what you can affect that's practical and you can keep efficient, the energy of Saturn in the sign of Pisces, you're doing your level best to maintain, but also you're getting those early nights, being virtuous about your diet, gentle exercise, and so on. So Scorpio, one of the intriguing things of September's eclipses for you personally is your traditional ruler Mars is locked into your 12th house right up until we have the solar eclipse, then is going to enter your sign. So I think the solar eclipse in a way could be like a release, but the lunar eclipse, especially if you're a creative, what Mars can do is help you to dig deep within your resources or through past experiences or knowledge to perhaps share information or talents that you have with the lunar eclipse's support, because the conduit is Jupiter, which can be very much about information. So if you're wanting to expand in any way, infuse people with your ideas, don't underestimate the back catalogue of talents that you have that can be manifested by Mars. Unfortunately, Mars being in the 12th house can have a little bit more of a tricky influence in that it can be somewhat turbulent, maybe past disappointments, breakups, separations or losses that we've experienced. Mars can have a habit of stirring up the sediment of the things that we feel that we've sorted out. Now, the solar eclipse for you is in your sector of long-term plans, highest hopes, friendships and so forth. But because of the role of Saturn, but also Neptune in an opposition to the solar eclipse, I don't necessarily feel that as you go into 2026 that all your hopes will go exactly to plan, unfortunately. What I feel that you may have to do is be more discriminating, very Virgo, about who you spend time with. So as much as you can reach out to people with your talents, your enthusiasm, and if you're traveling anywhere with some friends on the back of that lunar eclipse, it could be great fun. But I feel that you'll be much more serious by the time of the solar eclipse, especially around your long-term future. And if there are some people that you're getting to know a lot more about them, your ability to penetrate in and understand people's motivations will become much clearer on the back of that solar eclipse. And unfortunately, Saturn could show up where there are fair weather friends, or where some of your long-term hopes perhaps need to be moderated, as they may encounter some roadblocks, or someone may see your idea as not being quite as feasible as you would like it to be. So do be aware that there could be less cooperation towards the end of this month and through the next 6 months if you are trying to do something very radically different with your long-term future. So Sagittarius, you're very much a free spirit, but this September there is a little bit of a juggle that you're going to need to work with, and it's a juggle that will take you into the new year. The month begins with the sun pushing you to claim the golden prize. If you've got talents, whether they're to do with performance, music, they're to do with your career, if you work for yourself, the 10th house energy is really saying that all the hard work you've put in over a very long period of time could see you have a significant breakthrough. If it doesn't crystallize this September, it will be coming. But you need to be mindful with the lunar eclipse of the emotional dimension. So if you're very career orientated or very goal orientated, it's great to go for that, but we also need to feed our souls, which is what the moon's about. The sun's much more masculine. It's about seizing the prize. It can be to do with being competitive. Now, interestingly, the lunar eclipse on the 2nd is supported by your ruler Jupiter in a very helpful way. And because the North Node, which is, if you like, the celestial hint to our senses, is just nudging you to stay in touch with your emotional base, whatever you're trying to achieve in the wider world, Jupiter's suggesting that your appetite for knowledge and information can help you to make some very canny choices. But one of the things that could show up this month, whether it's to do with the needs of maintaining or improving your home, whether it is to do with family situations, you may feel that there's some deflection away from what you want to really concentrate on. The other thing that could happen is that being a Sagittarius, you're always open to that next exciting new venture. And I feel the lunar eclipse reminds you through into the early part of next year that it is important to take moments to decompress and get in touch with those more emotional strands in your situation, that the demands of work can at times make it difficult to make the space for. Or if you're a parent or a leader, there are other people to think about, but it's important your needs get a space too. Now, the solar eclipse really could see you have some kind of breakthrough over the next half year, especially if you've really applied yourself over a long time. The issue, however, is just as you do go for that ultimate goal, maybe something inside you is going to shift because of Saturn being back in Pisces from the 1st, but then in a direct opposition with the Sun and the Moon on the solar eclipse. So whatever you want to go for, you could find that maybe you're looking at life or the role in a different way, and that can see you perhaps developing your thinking all the way up to the solar eclipse in Aquarius on the 17th of February, which is a sign that you have a great affinity for because you both like freedom, independence and fairness generally. So this month and this next 6 months could see you really take a big giant step forwards towards something that means a lot to you, but you need to take care of the basis of your world, the home and emotional function. Make sure that your support systems are nourished, and that does take a little bit of care. But if you can get the balance right, and as long as you don't feel conflicted by the needs of others, maybe some kind of breakthrough that you've been working towards for some time is going to show itself by the spring of next year. So Capricorn, the eclipse season of September is likely to have quite the impact over the next 6 months on all sorts of conversation and communication. Now, we have a myriad of ways of connecting to one another these days, whether it's through instant message, it can be through text and email, obviously conversation, yes, we can still do that occasionally, but it also can be the way that we get in touch with our thoughts, because the lunar eclipse on the 7th is in your 3rd house, which can be about beliefs. But because the North Node's in the mix, but they're both linking back to the wonderful Jupiter, if you do need to relate to people over the next half year, and you're going to encounter people who see things differently, bear in mind the energy of Jupiter, because I feel in the 7th house it's urging you to be optimistic, to see the best in people, but also not get too disturbed if you do encounter people who see things very radically different from yourself. Now, of course, there's some situations where we really do need to stand our ground. Could be if someone's been unfair over a contract, a job, maybe a travel plan can get snared as well. And the solar eclipse, on the face of it, with your ruler Saturn in opposition, could be more challenging. You could encounter people who push back on some of your thoughts, some of your ideas. If you're a more enterprising Capricorn and you're wanted to do something that is using the digital sphere, the potential for snags is actually quite high on that solar eclipse. So taking the ins and outs, the polarities of the two signs of Virgo and Pisces, Virgo for you is about expansion, travel, variety, higher information, higher education. The third house is our everyday connection and thoughts, but can be about beliefs. The moon here can be weakened, but the node strengthens, and Jupiter threaded into the entire mix is urging you just to stay in touch with trying to find a moderate outcome in most situations. What's not to like? Well, just be conscious of Mars, because Mars is in a very visible part of your chart through the two eclipses and can make you want to reflect that part of your nature that can be very much an expert, it can be very experienced, that you want to share your wisdom. It could be where you want to in some ways manage a situation, and that's where your communicational skills could be tested the most. So if you're pushing hard to gain greater recognition, that's where you may experience the most resistance, but particularly from the solar eclipse over the next 6 months. So Aquarius, your eclipse series season for September, providing a backdrop for the next half year, begins with your traditional ruler Saturn inversing back into the sign of Pisces on the 1st. Let's just rewind to the 25th of May when he left the sign of Pisces. But also rewind a little bit further back from then. He first entered your sign for about 10 weeks in March 20, pitched back up in Aquarius on the 17th of December. So from the end of 220 through to now, Saturn has either been present in your own sign or the second house. The first house can be very much about our identity, our physical energy, our creativity, where we want to make an impact. The second house can be the outcome of that effort, but also it can be where we validate our worth. Everyday money can be to do with life foundations and things like food. So Saturn moving back into that area suggests that if you had been experiencing since March 2023 any change in your income or a challenge to your sense of self-worth, that could be tested somewhat more in this eclipse series through to the early part of next year. But intriguingly, the lunar eclipse of the 7th is blessed by two influences: the North Node, the point of destiny, in a conjunction with the moon, but also Jupiter, the planet of plenty, of good fortune. The lessons, and Saturn is, after all, about lessons, but also about self-discipline, that Saturn has been investing upon us Aquarius people over the last 5 years. If you've really been able to embrace those lessons, I feel this next quarter, this next 5 or 6 months, is a chance to actually use all the wisdom that you've been accumulating to make some very smart and shrewd decisions about how to use the energy, but also the money and the value that you have as a person very astutely. So there's lots to be gained, but as ever, because of the polarity with the sun in the sign of Virgo, there could be a bit of a juggle, the ins and outs. And Virgo for you is shared finances. You could actually have a breakthrough where you do start to firm up something, where you are receiving respect, particularly at work, for just how much effort and dedication you've put in. Now, Mars, the planet of assertion, action, courage, is in your sister air sign of Libra right up until the second eclipse, the solar eclipse, before making its way right to the top of your chart. Brilliant if you do want to seize greater recognition, But just be aware that if there is a situation where the give and get, because eclipses are about polarities, the 8th house where Virgo is about where you're most invested, but it can be where you have a certain expectation that other people will be as committed as you. And then with the solar eclipse being directly opposite Saturn, that could be somewhat challenging. If you encounter someone who has radically different values to you, who perhaps tends to play it quite rough and tough, what Mars can do is just push you to free yourself, liberate yourself, whether it's from a romantic attraction or involvement, whether it is from a business association, whether it is from a relationship you're already in. If you're really not getting that give and get quite in the way you need, you don't feel really validated, you don't feel what you're putting in, not on a quid pro quo basis, is being matched by the other side, Mars can push you to think about liberation. But don't be too quick to rush to the exit, because I feel that what Mars is doing before it prepares to go to the top of your chart is perhaps pushing you to be open about how you generate revenue, who you can collaborate with. There's lots of different ways to flex these days that didn't used to be there many moons ago. So even if Saturn does bring some cool logic and harsh restriction to certain parts of your chart, just know there is a solution, and it can be a solution that sees you achieve acclaim. So I feel that it's important to recognize where Mars is this month, important to be conscious of Jupiter, but also that Pluto in your sign is continuing to forge an absolutely fantastic link to Uranus. So the more modernistic side of your nature can shine, but also that very responsible traditional side can also show up as well. But there just is a big transition going on, and I think when Saturn does fully go back into Aries next year, it's obviously going to forge the conjunction with Neptune in February, which is really notable. But as it moves forward and starts to speed up, all the effort and preparation you've been putting in can start to come back to you in the most magnificent of ways, not least because the next solar eclipse is going to be in your sign on the 17th of February. So the big takeout of this solar eclipse series in September for you, beyond that it provides a backdrop for the next 6 months, is that Saturn's in the mix, and Saturn returns to your sign on the 1st of the month. So that's the big deal. Saturn last was with you on the 25th of May from the 7th of March 2023. If you are older, you could go back about 28 or so years, 28 and a half years to when Saturn was last making its way through your sign. You could get a bit of an echo of some of the stuff that happened then. But of course this unique period is influenced by the specific players this time around. And what we have with the Sun and also Mercury in the sign of Virgo is that can be about work. But Mercury particularly can be about marketing, but it can be about commerce, so it could be professional relationships as much as personal ones. Mercury's great for being a bit more detached, and it's at home, it's domiciled in Virgo. When it's in your sign, it can be perhaps a little more dreamy, but ultimately hugely imaginative and very talented. But what you've got on the 7th with the lunar eclipse is a wonderful merging between the moon and the north node. That north node, the point of destiny, is a critical degree. So if you've got planets from around about 13 to 17, you're going to feel that keenly. But also Jupiter, your traditional ruler, is bringing some real levitation. Now, very often Pisces people can be very skilled, artistic, and show great flair. Jupiter's there as a conduit to receive that energy and amplify it, but also because it's linking back to the position of the Sun. For the Sun, in terms of House 11, there may be some influential friendships and collaborations you can develop from that lunar eclipse. Why not? But if it is around work or around relationships that aren't quite working, with the Sun being in Virgo, because although the 7th house gets talked about even as marriage by some astrologers. I think it's more about collaboration. Collaboration comes from feeling respected, so then we give and we take. But if we don't feel we're being appreciated, what the seventh house can be is where we put our line in the proverbial sand. So it can be where we're more assertive, perhaps defend the things that are important to us. So as you go into the solar eclipse, with that going face to face with Saturn in your sign, if you ask someone with planets more towards the end of Pisces, even though in whole sign, whether it's through the sun or the ascendant, all Pisces will feel this at some level, I feel there could be a crunch discussion or meeting. It might not be in September, but because Mars is just about to alight into your sister water sign of Scorpio just after the solar eclipse, if you're not happy, Mars could push you in some ways to liberate or separate yourself from a situation where you just feel that part of you that can be so profoundly giving and sacrificing, if it's just being taken for granted over and over, and however much you try to relate back and explain how you feel, if it's still not heard, especially around your work, but it could be in a personal relationship. I think for some Pisces people, there could be a desire to break free. But just know this, just before the solar eclipse, Venus, the relator, moves into your seventh house. So even if something has been very challenging, and it is forging a difficult angle with Pluto in your 12th house, it may be that if something comes into the open that's been simmering away and perhaps poisoning the atmosphere, I actually feel that solar eclipse could still, even if some frank exchanges are had, still could push something out into the open that actually can be very positive in the longer term.